5 o'clock where I am in Uganda. And I want to say hello to all and welcome to the third annual EcoHealth Global Summit 2025. We are so happy and excited to have you here for the European session. My name is Evan Griffith. I'm a veterinarian and PhD candidate at Tufts University, and I've been working with an incredible group of early career colleagues from around the world to run the Global Summit this year. So just to give you a bit of a background, the Global EcoHealth Summit was first created in 2022 by Margot Parks, who is the chair of the EcoHealth International External Advisory Group, and Angel Kennedy. It began as a space, and of course, Angel is here today. It began as a space to foster ecological and equity-informed innovation, integration, and global collaboration to improve the health for all. Work that requires not only knowledge, but also relationships, trust, and deep care across regions, disciplines, sectors, and generations. And so the summit grew from this desire to create a connected, intentional space, spaces where we don't just talk about health and sustainability, but where we practice collaboration, hold space for diverse knowledge, and support each other in the face of complex, overlapping challenges. And we often call this gathering the Earth Hug, which is a reflection of what it feels like to come together across continents, time zones, and lived experiences to say that, and in the current time, and I'm from the US, I want to say this with intention. You and we are not alone in this work. In a world that can feel fragmented and overwhelming, the Earth Hug is a reminder that connection is a form of resistance, and that love, care, and collective support are essential ingredients in building a healthier, more just, and sustainable future. And we're proud to host the Earth Hug now as an annual event, and I think it's getting bigger and better every year. And so we look forward to welcome you back next year. So for this year, our summit conversation is connected to the Middle East, North America, Turtle Island, Oceania, and we just had an incredible session from the Africa region around gender equity and inclusion. And please let us know where you're from in the chat, as we already mentioned. And as part of this interconnected conversation, I'd like to ask a representative from the Africa Regional Session to jump in and just give a brief summary of what we did in the previous session. So please just introduce yourself and give us a summary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Unopane Jajimwe. I am from Botswana. By training, I'm an attorney by training, and I was very happy to be part of the African session of the EcoHealth Summit. Just by way of summary of what we discussed, we went through the connection between gender inequality and access to healthcare services. Now, we started off by getting an understanding of what gender is. Well, before that, we held our discussion by way of a panel discussion from different experts in the field, especially in the research field. So we started off by understanding what gender is, that it's a social concept, a relational power between men and women, and how they're perceived by the society. And it was noted further that each gender is faced with specific challenges and different access to tools that help them assist them with their challenges. And this includes also access to health services. And the obstacles that were noted were that marginalized people cannot access healthcare services as compared to people in positions of power. It was noted also that men, for example, are very uncomfortable with accessing healthcare. It was noted that young individuals also, for example, are not comfortable with accessing healthcare, and the reasons are different. For young people, for example, is usually discomfort in accessing sexual reproductive health services because they are criticized by the healthcare providers. We also noted obstacles associated with cultural norms that usually prioritize one gender over the other, specifically prioritizing men over women, making it easier for men to get access to healthcare than women. There was also inequality noted with access to economics, you find that women do not have the cash power to access healthcare, not even to pay for the services itself, but money for transport to go to the healthcare center. And we also noted that there is inequality in access to education, especially again for women, where you find that the roles are set up such that men get more information than women. Therefore, you find that women, when they are sick, they don't even know what the problem is. They don't know how to prevent certain illnesses, and they also don't have the power to control their own reproductive life. That being said, there were also discussions on what can be done to improve equal access to health. It wasn't all bad. There were certain items that were noted that were noted to be able to assist. And the following points were noted first. It was agreed that there is need to intensify research on gender inequality and present scientific facts so that decision makers can know that gender inequality and access to health are related, so that they can see the facts and the figures and know that they need to formulate policies that are targeted to these problems. There was also noted that there is a need to stop normalizing healthcare abuse. We spoke of especially when women are giving birth, and this was something that was true because I have experienced it as well, where when you are giving birth, you find that the care that you are given through the process is not as compassionate as you would expect. There's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of criticism, especially when you express the pain of the process. And I agree that we had normalized such things. We say, that's just how the midwives are. There's also healthcare abuse that we have normalized, like I said, in access to sexual reproductive health services. If you are a certain age and you approach these health institutions, they make it a point to let you know that, no, you are too young to know about this. Why are you asking for this service? So you find that young people don't access such services, and then they end up falling prey to, health issues related to sexual reproductive health. So it was agreed that we need to stop normalizing these kind of abuses and report them when we see them or when we experience them. We also spoke of creating gender responsive budgeting. Ailments that affect men are not the same as ailments that affect women. Therefore, when we budget for these, we should take that into consideration to know that one gender may require a higher budget than the other. And then education, of course, for both men and women, make education accessible to both men and women without discrimination as to their roles or traditional roles. We also spoke of community-led solutions, that we, instead of sitting in our offices and in our classrooms and coming up with solutions for people, we need to go to the people and ask them the challenges that they are facing and what they believe their solutions could be. That would be more effective than coming with a solution to people and then, not knowing if it will be applicable to them. And we also spoke.
Yeah, so if I can just jump in, thank you so much for that summary, just in the interest of time. But I really appreciate you giving us that really detailed summary. And I think actually your last point about community focused practice is actually really valuable and important for this session. So thank you so much for that summary. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Let me just share my screen here. Yeah, so maybe I'll just reintroduce myself. But as I said, my name's Evan. I'm an early career representative for EcoHealth International and also secretary of the Network for EcoHealth and One Health. And we have a lot of NEO members here today, which is really exciting, including our panelists. I just want to give Mark an opportunity to introduce himself as well, since he will also be one of the moderators.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Mark Yamba. I'm a medical doctor and epidemiologist. I'm currently doing my PhD in epidemiology at the University of Zurich and working with Simon, who will also be part of the panel today. So shortly, je m'appelle Marc, je suis médecin et épidémiologiste. Je suis heureux d'être parmi vous. J'ai fait mon PhD à l'Université de Zurich en épidémiologie et je travaille avec Simon, qui est également avec nous ici. on vous souhaite la bienvenue, si vous nous suivez en français, bien sûr. So, Ivan, I just wanted to do it in French as well. The floor is yours then to start.
That's great. Thank you so much. So this is just a brief agenda of where we're going to go today on our 3-hour journey together. So we've given you sort of the summit summary. Mark and I are going to give a very brief introduction to systems thinking, and then we'll get into our speaker presentations and panel discussion. And then we'll start our fuzzy cognitive mapping workshop where we'll all be splitting into small groups. So let's get started on that so we can get to the fun stuff. So a system is a set of elements or parts that is coherently organized and interconnected in a pattern or structure that produces a characteristic set of behaviors, often classified as its function or purpose. And when we think of systems thinking, traditional may often be in more of a linear fashion, like the left side of this diagram, whereas systems is really looking at all the different components, how they're related, the emergent properties from feedback loops and other aspects. So let me just go to this diagram here. This is just a summary of sort of what the authors have described as the 4 waves of system thinking. And what I wanted to do is just give you a brief overview of the discipline. It's not going to be complete, but hopefully it'll give you sort of a basis to think on. The first thing that I wanted to say is that I actually added this part to the left side of the figure, where it's talking about indigenous relational approach and specifically what's called participatory ontoepistemology. And I think it's important to acknowledge the contribution of indigenous scholars that are rarely recognized on the dominant literature on this subject. Yet their insights are profound and deeply grounded in relational and systemic ways of knowing. These knowledge systems are rooted in a relational ontoepistemology and noxiology of reciprocity, where knowledge is inseparable from being in relationship and where inquiry is a participatory act that co-creates the world with other human and more than human actors. And so I just wanted to emphasize that these sort of waves of system thinking, are sort of what's in the literature, but they don't necessarily acknowledge the traditional and indigenous leaders in this space. So if we're thinking more in an academic sense, the first wave of systems thinking was referred to as hard systems. And if you're like me, you may remember these food webs from elementary school where you saw all the different animals and plants and everything. And so hard systems thinking was really in response to overly reductionist approaches to natural processes. And it included important concepts like general systems theory and cybernetics. The second wave of systems thinking, referred to as soft systems thinking, which really emphasizes qualitative modeling and participatory practice. And I would say even the sort of activities that we're doing today really sit very well in this soft systems thinking. And Peter Cheklin was an important researcher in this space who was investigating soft systems methodology. The third wave was sort of a combination of the first two and referred to as critical systems that really addressed power dynamics, marginalization, and civil society dialogue. And so really examining those power relationships, even our last session on gender, thinking about those dynamics. And then the final wave, which is sort of still in its infancy, was really focused on universality and diversity and the integration of physical and cognitive sciences. And so an example of that would be the DSRP framework, which is looking at distinction, systems, relationships, and perspectives. And so this is by no means comprehensive, of course, but hopefully it gives you an idea of sort of the discipline and what came before. And I would say just as sort of an overall message that the world is more interconnected than ever. We have a global economy, we have global challenges from climate change, biodiversity loss, and emerging infectious disease. And so systems thinking really gives us a framework and an approach to understand these issues and come up with solutions together, which is why we need it more than ever. And so let me just hand off to Mark here for the next section.
Yeah, so as you have seen, thank you very much, Ivan, introduction on system thinking. As we have seen, the topic of this session is system thinking for One Health operationalization. So we wanted shortly to give you a very short background on what is One Health and how does system thinking allows us to really operationalize One Health. So One Health is an approach which is bringing together disciplines from the human, animal, environmental sectors together, putting in place collaboration, improving collaboration, communication, coordination, and information sharing between these sectors, including communities as well, to improve the way we see and we address integrated challenges that we face at the human, animal, and ecosystem interface. And this approach is needed at the national, at the subnational, even at the community level, if we really intend to have healthy ecosystems, healthy animals, and healthy humans. And One Health improves the way we work, we collaborate, and we share information, and also provides an opportunity to put different actors together and disciplines so that we have co-creation, and our initiatives are then sustainable because they take into consideration all these dimensions from the human, animal, ecosystem, but also the people at the community level. So how then is system thinking operationalizing One Health? That's the question you asked to me. So this is very simple. As understanding how things are connected, we clearly understand how different disciplines need to work together. Because if you are mapping a system, it's the most important thing that you get out of it is a clear understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve. And that clear understanding of the problem that you are trying to solve helps you to see how different components connect, and allows also to see how different sectors, different disciplines can intervene to then improve our capacity to address the problem. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that systems thinking is one of the key One Health competencies. If you look at this diagram from the new paper on updated One Health competencies, you will see that we have skills, we have values and attitude, and we then have knowledge and awareness. And systems thinking is part of the key skills that we need to have as part of One Health. And this is like jointly with effective communication, collaboration, and resilient working, and systems understanding. So the NEO team suggested this framework or these competencies because they all truly understand that systems understanding allows people to strengthen their collaboration and their information sharing between sectors. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, Ivan, up to you.
Yeah, I changed it. Do you see it?
Yeah, up to you now for this slide. Oh,
Sorry, let me reshare.
okay.
Can you see it now?
Yep. Do you want me to present it, or you are doing it from your side?
Oh, sorry, you want me to do it? Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So my apologies. So basically what we're looking at here is what's sort of called the triangle of systems thinking. So the idea is that if we understand sort of the surface of, or just the event, we can react. And that's sort of a short-term response to a crisis. But we can actually go deeper. And this is what these sort of action strategies are related to, the level of understanding you have of the system. So for example, if you look at patterns of behavior, just under the surface there, you can sort of see trends or what's happening over time, and that actually allows you to anticipate, which allows you to obviously, intervene and have some strategies there. If we go even deeper and we're really looking at the, feedback loops, the structural forces at play, the underlying systemic structure, now we can actually design policies based on that deeper understanding. And then the sort of deepest and aspect here is the mental model. So actually actors, people, communities, what is it about our thinking that creates the system and then supports those systems for persisting? And that's when we can actually get to the transformation where we're shifting mindsets and values to create lasting system change. And that kind of draws back to my mind the idea around gender transformation that we talked about in the previous session. And so now we'd like to have our speakers each give a 5-minute presentation. So I'll let Mark read their bios and then we can proceed.
Yeah, great. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I will start with Simon and then move to the others as well. So Simon is a senior researcher from the University of Zurich in Switzerland. He has a doctorate in veterinary medicine and a PhD in epidemiology, biostatistics, and molecular biology of tick-borne diseases. So he has worked in the field project in Mongolia and as a veterinarian for exotic pets in Switzerland before returning back to academia as a researcher at the University of Zurich. So now he's based in the section of veterinary epidemiology at the University of Zurich, as I said, where he conducts research and teaching with statistics consultancies as well. So Simon's research focus on application of system thinking and system theories for complex adaptive systems to medicine. And yeah, I think that's it. He works in disease surveillance and is also part of the network for evaluation of One Health. And Simon is also my PhD supervisor. Simon, are you there? Can I see you?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, yeah. So you're welcome, Simon.
Hello, everyone. So I'll try to keep it short. I think, I mean, we've seen that gender has a major impact on how things are accessible. On the other hand, I guess the way we understand gender will also have an impact on how we interact. So what I'm particularly interested when we take a systems thinking approach is that actually there's recursive loops in whatever we do. So there's essentially whatever I say now here is going to have an impact on you and what you are going to think within 5 minutes and what you might be saying in 10 minutes, which is then going to impact me again. So we're essentially permanently in recursive loops that make us evolve. And I think we need to be much more aware of this because we tend to think of things as a plane, as a map, as you know, as Evan has shown, you know, we have evolved from thinking in terms of single lines to networks of lines. But we still think of it as something flat. We don't think about the evolution in time. And I think, you know, like the deep system thinking is moving beyond that thinking in networks, but actually thinking in terms of evolution, in terms of co-evolution, in terms of us as an element in the system that has an impact on how the system evolves. And that's actually quite tricky because if I don't know myself, I don't know what I do. I don't know how I impact you. And I will know myself as far as I can, and I probably know myself better when I'm age 50 than when I'm age 20. So I get to learn myself and to learn about myself, and I should not expect at age 25 to actually know who I really am, and I should go onto a journey to discover who I am. And I think that, you know, that kind of resonates with the idea of gender. What am I if I'm a man? What am I if I'm a woman? What does that mean for my role in society? What can I say? What can't I say? How do I have access to health? How do I not have access to health? What is my impact? What's my leverage? So what's important in this for me is that we keep vigilant, that we keep alert about thinking and about knowing. So do we know ourselves? What do we know about the system that we're studying? And I would recommend that whenever we look at a system, we look at it as a hypothesis. We look at it as a transitory or transient idea of how reality actually looks like. And that will help us to become much more resilient because we are not fixed in a way that we think the system is, but we actually keep aware that it is our hypothesis on how the system works. And when we keep it as a hypothesis, we just keep verifying whether we're correct, and we can keep correcting and we can keep evolving. And actually, by doing that, we become systemic and we become much more effective in reality because we keep adapting to what we're trying to understand. And with this, I think that's really important when we are talking about implementation of things like One Health or integrated approaches to health or any interaction with complex adaptive systems, is they are adaptive, and so we need to be adaptive too. And that's really important to keep a mindset that makes us adaptive and that allows us then to evolve as things change and as we start understanding things differently. And as you go through life, and I'm not old, but I'm still, I have some years of experience, and I have changed my view on how things are in the world several times. And I think that's really what makes you a scientist too, is that you're able to actually change your worldview and you don't stay anchored in one worldview and insist on this worldview to be the only one and the right one. And with that, I'll give back to Mark and Evan.
Yeah, that's great, Simon. Thank you very much. There is one thing that's really very important coming out of what you said. We need to be adaptive as we are addressing complex adaptive problems. So we see them as they progress over time. That's really very interesting. Thank you very much, Simon. And we will have you again for the next session. Next will be Tiffany Kenny, who will be I will be introducing very soon. She's an assistant professor in the Faculté de Médecine at University of Montreal in Canada. Her research takes a transdisciplinary approach to exploring the complex interplay between social and ecological determinants of health. So over the past decades, Tiffany has had the privilege of collaborating with Indigenous communities in northern and coastal Canada on food security research, supporting locally driven solutions. Tiffany, we are very happy to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
And enchanté, everyone. It's great to meet you all. What an exciting event to be a part of. So I'm going to talk today about some of the work that we've been doing over the last decade in collaboration with coastal Indigenous communities. So it's no mystery that climate change has had profound impacts on every asset of society, including health, especially with respect to food security and nutrition. And all the way back in 2014, the high-level panel of experts on food security had recognized this, especially as it related to food from the sea, food from our oceans. And even at the time, they had recognized that we needed to take a nutrition-sensitive approach, which had not been at the time mainstreamed within fisheries and aquaculture, although many people rely on these foods as a primary protein and micronutrient source, but also that we had to engage in inclusive dialogue to build scenarios to understand how these impacts might be felt among the most vulnerable or the most impacted. Next slide, please. So I've been really privileged, as I mentioned, for the last decade to work in collaboration with Indigenous communities to develop some of these tools and methods to foster the inclusive dialogue. And I'll talk today about some of the participatory systems modeling approaches that we've taken. But what you won't see present so much in the slides is all the people who are behind it. And I would say that one of the most important aspects of this kind of work is not so much the end product, although it is important and it is scientifically valuable, but the way that it can foster dialogue between generations, across time, between genders, as you can see here when we were building an ecosystem model together last December in Kuujjuaq. Next slide, please. And just to show how relevant this type of approach is for human health questions in an Indigenous community context, This is work that had really inspired me during my PhD, and it shows two perspectives on diabetes from a Western scientific perspective, where we'd see the traditional epidemiological variables like smoking, alcohol consumption, diet, body weight. But if you go to the next slide, here we see a traditional knowledge perspective on determinants of diabetes, and it's an opportunity to make more explicit and to make better recognized factors like relationship to land, language, relationship to others, community involvement, community security, ways of life, but even as far as relationship to the sacred and the spiritual aspects that are maybe immaterial, but that are really important driving factors in the system. Next slide, please. I'll just share quickly part of the work that we've done as part of a Canadian Institutes of Health Research funded project with 4 coastal First Nations along the coast in British Columbia. Next slide, please. What we knew from prior work that had been done at a global scale, this is work that was led by William Chung at UBC. You can see here in the left panel just how much under different scenarios of climate change, the red and the blue dots, how the catch potential for species that were culturally valued, that were really important to traditional diets, was projected to change under climate change. And the changes we see here are relative changes. And so we recognize that even relative to today, things are much lower than they used to be. And so when we consider that some species like Pacific herring and salmon would decline by, 1/3 to 50%, this is really concerning from a public health perspective. As we see here on the right, we had done a dietary survey with the 4 nations, and we could see just how important the fish was in terms of contributing to micronutrient intake. For example, EPA and DHA intake for the different genders, the blue males and the orange for women. And we see that under the different scenarios of climate change, if we assume that the decline in consumption will be proportional to the decline in availability of fish in the sea, we see that under several scenarios, we go from having nutrient adequacy to the nutrient intake being inadequate. Next slide, please. But we know, of course, that it isn't a linear relationship between the fish that's in the sea and the fish that ends up harvested and shared throughout the community through different programs, and then the fish that ultimately ends up on people's plates. And so I'll just show you quickly one of the participatory mapping approaches that we took. The first part of the project was developing a conceptual map of the system, and the second was to push it a little bit further towards the logic-based influence diagram. Next slide, please. So we can see here the different approaches, and I should mention that, it's not only myself who is involved in this work. There's also a really brilliant master's student, Patricia and Kira Guang, William Chung, and others. And it's a little bit difficult to see on this map, but maybe if we just go to the next slide. So when we look at what's, driving harvest and access, yes, there is the fish that's available in the sea, but there's a lot of other factors like the regulations, like the transport, like having access to it, and also pollution levels that reflect historical colonial impacts on the local ecosystems. If we go to the last slide, please. Yeah, and just as we can see here that yes, abundance in warming waters and red tides and harmful algal blooms, the biological or the biophysical factors are really important drivers. We see these on the left, but if we look more on the right of the diagram, we see that, having the knowledge, having the access rights are really critical. And this was really important for the community to be able to make explicit and make it recognized as a factor among many others. We talk a lot about climate change, but climate change has to be taken in context in terms of the historical context, the colonial context, pardon me, and the enduring impacts that this has, particularly the type of feedback loops it can create in terms of knowledge to harvest and the interests and the taste for the food. And so I know this was, the output of this was important to the community to be able to have these factors recognized and acknowledged, but everything that was behind it, bringing the elders together, bringing fishermen, community food program leads together, that was a really valuable part of it. So I look forward to discussing more about this project and others throughout. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tiffany. Very nice presentation. So yeah, basically, you talked about how to engage into inclusive dialogue and analysis to build the different scenario that we want. And this is very important because it generates knowledge with while sharing with different generations. So we will move to our next speaker, Sukuman Riten. Sukuman is a lecturer at Chalborn University Academy, Chalborn Royal Academy in Thailand. She's a veterinarian interested in wildlife medicine, conservation, One Health, and epidemiology. So Sukuman's goal is to integrate the One Health approach into wildlife conservation. For her PhD research at the University of Zurich, she applied transdisciplinary research tools to support One Health in managing human-macaque interactions in Thailand. One of the tools that Sukuman used was fuzzy cognitive mapping, which we'll use very shortly in our breakout rooms. So this is very valuable for understanding the current state of human-macaque interface in our study area. Sukuman, we are very happy to have you today. Can you please open up your mic and share with us your slide? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for introducing me. And hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share my experience using system thinking and FCM as a tool for One Health approach in my PhD project. First, I would like to introduce the human-macaque interaction or HMI situations in my research. I select two study sites that I show you in the map. For my research, both of them share the similar cultures, background, and complex situations of conflicts. The first site, called Prapang Samyot in Lopburi province, it is a city where macaques live alongside humans. That is well known to tourists as City of Monkey. Macaques inhabit house, ancient building, and on the street. They often beg for food or steal food and belonging from the human. Sometimes people are injured in macaque attack. However, many residents believe macaques are connected to the local shrines, deity, and should not be harmed. And another study site is called Khao Sammuk in Chonburi province, had a similar setting as a tourist destination, where macaques are associated with the goddess of Khao Sammuk. Unlike Lopburi province, that these areas still have forested mountains that serve as a macaque habitat. However, it is surrounded by the road and villages, where macaque often forage food for humans. So next slide, please. In my research, one aim to address the problems and understand the situations and management of HMI in the study areas. My hypothesis is that each location face a specific challenge that require different management strategy and policy approach. To explore this, we use FCM and system thinking as a tool to understand stakeholder perspective, encourage their participations, and help them visualize the HMI as a system. We conduct 3 workshops in each study area, inviting selected stakeholders from various disciplines and different organizations who involved in the HMI. In the first step, you can see here in the first picture, the participants individually identify the element which could be tangible or intangible element that related to the human and macaque interactions. This helping them to better understand of the situation. For the next step, they work the stakeholder work together in the groups, about 4 to 5 people in each group to develop the fuzzy cognitive map. This allowing them to collaborate and engage freely without the constant of hierarchy, because in Thailand we have the hierarchy problems for each organizations, and we also have the problem with organized boundaries. So they can work without the boundaries of organization and all bias, and without the conflicts. For the last slide, please. Okay. And this is an examples of the finalized FTSE cognitive map from Khao Sam Muk in Chonburi. The map was validated and agreed by the stakeholder during the workshops. We use it to develop management strategies for HMI by stimulating different management scenario and predicting potential outcome based on change in the FCM's element. From my experience using FCMs, I found it is an effective tool for foster the system thinking among the participants and facilitating discussion and negotiations among of them. The FTSE cognitive map stimulations allow me to predict the various scenarios, helping the decision-making develop the strategies. But however, the effectiveness depends on the obtaining sufficient information to construct the meaning scenarios. Additionally, introducing system thinking to stakeholders improve their understandings of underlying problems and understand the theory of change that adding to strategy development. Our study also levels the survival challenges. We found combining map from the different stakeholder groups was not easy, and we use repeating workshop for FCM developments. It requires significant time, efforts, and required stakeholder engagement. Furthermore, some stakeholders were unable to attend every workshop due to the COVID-19 situation, and they have the bureaucratic system. That is a problem for our study. Therefore, I learned that proper process for planning for the co-producing of the FCMs may help minimize these challenges. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sukuman, for sharing your work, which is really very interesting. So you used FCM to work on provide some management strategies, and you also shared some of the challenges in implementing such methodology in your study. Thank you very much. The last speaker will be, let me read it as it sounds in French, Nicolas Antoine Monsieur, who is a veterinarian, also trained in sociology and economics. So Nicolas developed a track of research and teaching focusing on integrated approaches to health, mainly mobilizing the One Health concept. So he worked in the Global South with collaboration in the Global South and has contributed and still contributing to several cooperation projects in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. His research interest more particularly covers the use of participatory approaches in the analysis of the decision-making and involvement of stakeholders in different organizations to improve interdisciplinary and intersectoral collaborations. He also contributed to the development of tools in support to this kind of processes, such as evaluation framework, serious games, training methods, and so on. So Nicolas is a coordinator of a postgraduate program at the University of Liège, which is called Integrated Management of Health Risks, and is particularly committed to the practical translation and into actions of the conceptual foundation of One Health. Nicola, it's our pleasure to have you today. We hope you are online. Please open up your microphone and share with us your understanding. Thank you.
Yes, I'm connected. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. You're welcome.
That's just great. So I will use the few minutes that I have to talk to you, maybe to try to complete the introduction that was given to you here. What you will learn today, what you will maybe discover truly today, are tools, and we just had right now a glimpse on those great tools, system thinking tools. And indeed, entering into system thinking through the practice, it's just great because you can learn it by doing. But as an opening to this discovery of yours, I would like to pinpoint, maybe to invite you to think about what you need to learn to be able to implement system thinking. And obviously, it's not just about the tool. Most probably, with Simon at the very start of this introduction, you already got the feeling, the understanding that system thinking is about a way of viewing the world and a way of being. So the tool is not enough. The tool has to take a place into a practice, and to take a place into a world vision that you have to develop. This is not something that you can learn like just from textbook. It's not something that you will learn on 1 week. It's something that you will have to discover slowly, that you will have to develop slowly, and that you will have to develop in your own way, around your own practical problems, your own real world problems. Because for sure, it's not something that can just stay at the level of well, we have like funky concepts and very interesting things to tell with that view of system thinking. We have also interesting workshop to animate with nice tools, but that's not the goal. The goal is to have an impact in the field, and anything that you might develop has to be fueled by both some practice of those tools and a deeper understanding of the system thinking. So maybe that's the best way to use these few minutes discussing with you. It's to invite you to discover this with an open mind and to take that complexity seriously, because it's out there. And when we try to implement any solution, or at least things that we think are solutions, it become new problems. And when we are tackling problems, we sometimes or most often forget that those problems are in fact the solutions of other problems. And when we understand that intermingled web of problems and solutions, the one creating the others and the others creating the ones, we then can try to act, but humbly, into that complexity with our tools, not thinking that they will like resolve because we had a nice workshop and we have nice representations and we have a good feeling that we can change something. We are just participants. We are just contributing to what we are doing. Nobody is in power of doing really the thing that we want to be and to become. You can't like let grow, if you want to grow a plant, you can't just pull on it till it has the right size. What you have to do is just to feed the soil and to take care to the context and to an environment to see how it can then help drive the system or the problem that you're trying to influence in the right way. So it's that constant system thinking is a constant tension between being focused on things and paying still attention to their context. It's a tension between the need to cut the reality in pieces that can be handled, that can be understood, and still reconnect all those pieces into a meaningful whole. It's a tension between trying to be clear with what we are doing and accepting that things are fuzzy. And so that will be the last word, because this is what we are doing today, the fuzzy cognitive mapping. And so the mapping is trying to make things clear, and the fuzzy part of it is something that we have to accept and to embrace. That is the very complexity of things that will make the fuzziness be there till the end. Don't expect it to just be lifted at some point. It will always be fuzzy. So maybe something that I can indicate you as something to be learned to be a system thinker is just to be comfortable with fuzziness. It's to be comfortable with what is unclear, to be comfortable with ambiguity. It is a key competency. That is something that we don't learn in school, and no teacher tell us to be comfortable with ambiguity. They'll try to teach us to be clearer, but maybe that in system thinking, that will be a key piece of it, learning to cope with ambiguity. And I will end here, Mark. Maybe I was a bit too long, sorry.
No, it's fine, Nicolas. Thank you very much. This was very clear. So basically, you invited us to learn system thinking by doing, but also have a look at the impact, not only the tools that we have, but think a lot about the impact of what we are doing in the field. And that's very, very nicely said. Thank you very much to all the speakers for the nice submissions. So now I'm handing it over to Ivan for the next session. Ivan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks to all the speakers. I think we really got to see some practical applications from a few and sort of how these methods are used, and then also thinking about it, sort of, the theory behind the method. To me, what really came out clearly was that constantly learning yourself, learning with other people, creating knowledge together, I think is something that really came out clearly. So the next thing we're going to do is have a brief question and answer period with our panelists. I think we should have a good 15 minutes, because then Mark and I are just going to do a short demonstration after. So maybe what I can do is start off with one question for the panelists to respond to. And then what I would request from the members of the group is either put your question in the chat, or maybe raise your hand on Zoom, and we can get to you. You can moderate the chat, Mark. That would be wonderful. Monitor. So the first question for our speakers is, what is the added value or advantage from applying systems thinking methods in your own work? And if we want to, if anyone feels strongly, they can go first, or we can just go in order of the presenters.
Well, I'll go first then, because that's something that I introduced my course with. Why should you do this? And I think, first of all, we're all probably based or somewhere referring to science as a base for decision making. So that means that we need to bring this scientific knowledge into the real world, and we need to create a bridge between what has been produced in a very reductionist paradigm. And I think that's really important to reflect on and to remember, is that, the reductionist paradigm, you called it the old way of thinking, which I don't think it's an old way of thinking. It's the scientific way of thinking. And it's a very valuable way of thinking, because it helps us to unearth relationships and to understand relationships. But it isolates single relationships between a cause and an effect. And because it isolates this, when you bring it back into reality, it's unrealistic, because in reality, there's more than one relationship. So actually, your scientific discovery doesn't fit the real world in which you will have to take decisions. And this is where system thinking helps you, because it helps you take these isolated snippets of knowledge and bring them back together into a bigger puzzle. And it gives you a systematic way to create that puzzle and to assemble that knowledge. And at the end, it actually helps you to recompose a model of the reality based on what we know in science. And I think that's really the power. It's not trying to take everything as it is and embrace the complexity and the fuzziness and the, it's all infinitely complicated and complex, and we'll never, there's nothing we can do about it, and sorry. That's not what system thinking is about. It's about how can we pull ourselves from our own neck out of the swamp? So, you might have heard of bootstrapping. How can we bootstrap ourselves into a better understanding of the complexity of the real world, using the knowledge that we generate with reductionist thinking? And I think having those two aspects is really important, and not denying the value of scientific knowledge which has been generated in a reductionist paradigm. It's using that knowledge, but then bringing it into the reality of the complex world where all these things interact, and where maybe certain parameters that we identified are not quite correct quantitatively, but qualitatively we have shown the relationship, so we can use the qualitative relationship that we know. But we may be wrong with the quantitative bit, but that's not really how to say it, it's not the end of the world, because if we know the quality of the relationships, we know a lot more than if we just assume it's a big lump of unknowns. So, and that also refers to some of the work that we've seen here. There's a value in participatory modeling, because we all know something. And many things are what we call tacit knowledge. So I guess that's what Tiffany is discovering with her work. It's a lot of the stuff that our ancestors just know because they've been told, and they don't, they didn't do a scientific research to discover it. And how are we going to put that into relationship with what we know from science? So that's where systems thinking helps. Anyway, I'll stop here.
Okay.
Thanks. Maybe Tiffany, if you, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I will share my experience from the workshop. During the workshop, stakeholders shared to me that they never work together in different organizations. This is the first time for them to work together and collaborate work. And they never know about the others' perspective of the different sides of organization or the opposite group. So this is the first time for them to work together and understand each other more. I think this is a valuable adding value for the process.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, maybe just to add what Simon and Sukaman said, I think one of the advantages of working with these frameworks and these methods in an Indigenous community context is that it more closely aligns with traditional knowledge viewpoints that recognize holism and that recognize connections between the past, present, and future, and between environment and human health. And it's unfortunate that within Western societies things are very siloed and fragmented. And for example, our Department of Fisheries and Oceans might do studies on belugas, whales that people hunt and rely on for food security. And they will study these to the extent of looking at, for example, mercury accumulation and nutrients and how it impacts the health of the beluga. But as soon as people eat it, it's no longer part of their jurisdiction. Oh, that's a health issue that's managed at a different level, even though we're still talking about the very same animal and the very same issue of mercury contamination. So things are very fragmented and siloed, and these approaches, I think, allow us to bring different actors, different knowledge systems together, but also recognizing, like, some of the maps that I showed at the end there, I don't know how valuable communities really do find them. To be honest, I think they find the process very useful, but it's still translated in a forum that is scientific, so I think just recognizing that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's such a good point. Such a valuable perspective. Nam, did you have something to add too?
Yes, well, I would say that basically system thinking helps you discovering new things. It helps you paying attention, sorry, to elements that you had not paid attention to before. It helps you discussing with people you had never discussed with before. It helps you taking sometimes truly new, even sometimes provocative or disruptive stance on things, because people are so accustomed to their way of doing. And we are also accustomed to considering, I would say, the blocks, the bricks, and not to see the cement, not to see the links between those elements. And system thinking is taking the interaction and putting it first in the thinking and at the forefront of the image that you are producing. And not only interactions like single interactions, but the global picture, the overall picture, that just the pattern that you can identify through a set of interaction. And those things, this way of viewing the world, helps you truly to bring an added value to people who are working into reductionist frameworks. So not telling, just like Simon just told, not telling that it's like an old way of thinking and we are proposing a new one. No, it's totally complementary. And that system thinking, it's bringing that added value, the different stance, the different look on things that people had not thought about before. So I truly believe it brings new ideas, in fact.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great point. I'm just gonna read this question from the chat, who's from my good friend and colleague Siraman, who's actually using fuzzy cognitive mapping to look at some issues around diarrheal disease in northern Kenya. But he asks, to any panelists, it seems that systems modeling can sometimes struggle to handle systems changes over time or spatial variability in the behavior of the system. In other words, spatial and temporal heterogeneity in the system structure and dynamics. Any thoughts or recommendations on how to handle these challenges? And I don't know, Dominique, if you wanted to answer, if you had your own question. So maybe we'll tackle this one first and then move to you. Thank you.
Well, coming from modeling myself, I think modeling is another way of reducing our understanding of a system. So, space-time, if we go, sorry to cite a famous scientist, but Einstein actually discovered this challenge of space-time, and that, the faster you travel, the shorter distances are getting. So we're not in the realm of relativity theory, but I think the challenge is actually this space-time. And when we do a model, we tend to look at a different dimension. So we think of entities and we try to put those entities in relation. and then it's either space or time that's falling off the panel. So we can only look at it one way or another. It's as if those dimensions were independent and actually entirely excluding each other. And I think that's really where the challenge lies, is that we're able to model something either in terms of space or in terms of time or in terms of entities, but we will never manage to do it all at the same time. It's a bit like your electron. It's either a wave or it's a particle. And in taking a systems approach, we might be able to see it as both. It gives us the opportunity to look at it as both. So we have the flexibility to say, okay, let's look at it as a particle now, and let's look at it as a wave in the next session. And by doing that, it gives us this opportunity to appreciate that there's a spiritual dimension to health, and there's a biomedical aspect to health, and both are valid, but they probably exclude each other mutually in terms of the way that we frame it.
If I may add, I think that the question is anchored in a willingness to produce good models that can be predictive. But maybe that what we are discussing about here is not about making good modeling in the way that they would like better reflect reality. A good model to me is rather a model that changes the society, that changes the narrative, that changes the way people will behave after that workshop. So maybe it's totally acceptable to me just to take time on board or space on board and not trying to combine and to have something that is better, to give a better prediction, because that it's very personal maybe, but what I'm paying more attention to is the social change and the change that we are trying to trigger.
Thank you. Thank you so much for both those answers. Tiffany, did you have an additional point too?
Yeah, I was just going to add quickly. I think one of the challenges that we face even among academic colleagues is people tend to think of models purely as forecasting, whereas a model can serve many more purposes than that, understanding a system, testing its boundaries, looking at certain hypotheses and scenarios. And so even among academic colleagues, I think these are notions we need to deconstruct to better understand what systems modeling really allows us to do. But it is something that, we're very much challenged with it, even when we're working at a small scale of a bay in northern Canada. Within that bay, every community, even though there might be some shared species based on the migrations, will have different species and different local dynamics. And I think when we work with community members, this is the scale at which they want to discuss things. So it is kind of tricky to say, well, we're talking about a soup of the whole region. And I think that's not necessarily very intuitive to people. So maybe an approach would be to start at that finer scale of resolution at the community level that's more relatable to people, and then move forward from there. But we don't always have the resources or the capacity or even the data to work at that level. So it is certainly a challenge.
Thank you so much. That's a really insightful point. Dominique, did you want to ask something?
Sorry, too many screens. Such an interesting conversation this morning, and great to be among you. I wanted to bring it back to this, to a question of how these tools and system mapping and engaging groups of people, what has been your experience of using it to help think through the different gender dimensions of things? And I know we started with that, and then we sort of moved into broader applications. But for me, it's one of the biggest challenges we have in One Health and in EcoHealth and other integrated types of approaches to health, is that well, there's a number of challenges. One is that those of us who are working in trying to strengthen a more a deeper understanding of how different groups see the world and how that affects their health and their understanding of what drives their health. So there's that, right? We as experts have an idea, a theory, some thoughts about that. And we're also operating in a context, particularly right now in North America, where gender and diversity and inclusion approaches are under attack and backlash. And then we have also in the community obviously their own understandings of traditional norms and roles with respect to gender and even different social groups. And I think systems mapping and systems approaches to engaging people can be really helpful to help neutralize some of the strongly held perspectives that people are unwilling to let go of, to open their minds and eyes and hearts to understanding that the world may be different for different groups of people. So that's my long-worded question. In this context, in these days, what has been your experience with different groups? My own experience has been with communities, and it has been very helpful. Limited experience, but quite helpful, helping people work through these things. But they're already at the table and willing. I wonder about a table of experts or a table of politicians who have strong reasons not to be open, if this could help. Over. Small question for today.
If I may, I'd like to cite a proverb that I came across some time ago. You can bring the cow to the fountain, but you can't force it to drink. And I think that's where we are. If there's unwillingness or, a profound rejection of any concept that would foster inclusion or tolerance or any, if there's a profound unwillingness, there's nothing you can do. And I think we can see it as a backlash. We can also see it as a step forward, because it's response. It means that the other thing that we moved, the inclusion, has caused reaction, which means the system is alive, which means we are evolving, which is nice. We might perceive it now instantaneously as regression, but maybe that's just, if you want to walk, you need to step from one foot to the other. Otherwise, you can't really get anywhere. So maybe we just need to change foot to be able to put our foot on inclusion one step ahead of where we stand now.
Yeah, in English, in my experience of that proverb, it's with a horse to the fountain. Absolutely. And the other apt, I think, idiom that we have, or expression, is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's still forward, right? And when we're using systems thinking and systems approaches, there are ways to have conversations that create the space for people to see the world differently, and that's different because they have been influenced by the perspectives of other people or of other things in the system, and that openness to seeing the world differently is one of the steps towards shifting strongly held views, and recognizing that most of the world are reasonable. Most people are reasonable. And most people, at least in private, are willing to think about things differently and be open to things differently. And it's creating those spaces. So I think that systems thinking can be useful, but I'd be interested and the tools in particular, if anyone else has had that experience around work on gender.
I was just going to add quickly, not to the point of gender. I think Evan actually has some really interesting experience there from his doctoral work that he might be able to share. But just to go back to that iceberg model that he showed, and at the bottom, at the base, is all of these assumptions and beliefs that we have about how the world works. And I think these are very useful tools for making these more explicit and recognizing them. And as much for the people that are developing the models as the people that are involved, the scientists that are involved in the process. And one of the things that we see a lot is, assumptions of like environmental determinism, that it's environmental drivers that are going to change, crop availability, fish availability, all of this kind of stuff. And they are important, but I think these type of models allow us to also recognize that there's a lot of social drivers that are very much present that play as important a role within modulating the dynamics of the system. So I think like this environmental determinism is something we don't always name and that we're not always aware of, but it is something that is influencing. I think it's when you approach it more from the ecological perspective. I think people that are working on these questions, maybe from a social and political science perspective, maybe approach it the same questions with more of that lens, but at least it allows us to recognize what we think is happening.
And from my side, well, it's not about gender, but what I could experience is that the tool can be very effective, very powerful tool, indeed producing an image that allows people to see things, and that is maybe a powerful driver to influence the way they understand the world. But to really change the mind, it takes time. It takes, well, a time of maturation, and that time, so you can't expect just one exposure to a tool to change the mind. So you need at least repeated exposure, and you need time. And it relates, in fact, to one of the questions that has been asked in the chat about the predisposition to reductionist or system thinking type. But one main drivers or one main characteristics of people who came into system thinking and who can tell they are system thinkers somehow, it's the time that they took. So it has been a journey, and it requires some years of maturation. So I can expect that if you want system thinking and an exposure to tools to change the mind of people, you need to establish a true relationship with those people. You can't truly expect to influence in one shot.
And for the little experience I have, I think if you want to address gender in a systems approach, you need to bring it explicitly into the conversation. So again, it's a willingness to engage with the theme of and with the challenge. So when we, gender may in a particular group of system thinkers may never emerge as a subject because it doesn't appear to be an obstacle or a challenge. Whereas if you have another composition of groups, it might emerge as the first central subject of the conversation. I think that has a lot to do with your stakeholder composition, as well as the way that you frame the question that you're trying to address with system thinking. And those are two things that we increasingly realize are really, really important things to think first before you start using any kind of method of system thinking, to start thinking, who am I going to get to the table and what are we going to talk about?
And I'd add to that, Simon, and it's absolutely true. We're grappling right now in in our work with the One Health high-level expert panel on whether or not One Health is a gender transformative framework. And by that, we mean a framework that has as one of its goals to promote and achieve better equality between groups, particularly different genders, but it's the wider kind of equity aspect of differences between groups. And or not. And it's I would say most of us would like the One Health kind of frameworks and tools that are being promoted by the international organizations to be along the road. No, let me just be frank, right? To be transformative. And yet, it's already such a challenge to invite stakeholders to think about outcomes in animal health, if they're in public health, to think about animal health and well-being and environmental outcomes such as biodiversity and water quality. That adding onto that, oh, and by the way, not by the way, and as a central plank, we want to do this in a way that promotes equity and equality. It's almost a bridge too far. And it's becoming a very interesting conversation in that kind of rarefied space, I would say, quite specific group of people who are already thinking systemically or trying to, and already trying to think about an integrated approach to health. And it's really interesting because even myself, I find myself saying, maybe it's too much to ask. And then my colleagues who are have been working in promoting gender equality for much longer and more directly than I have will say, no, you are succumbing, you are capitulating. We must always be striving for it, recognizing that it is not always possible to have this transformation of social norms as the main goal. Can we come at it gradually and through a process towards that goal, recognizing that there will be many sort of steps before then that won't be transformative, but at least acknowledge the differences, at least recognize and respond to those differences. So that's where I am in my sort of thinking about this, that it is the goal. It should be a goal. It is in the definition of One Health, sort of, and it is in the frameworks, the joint plan of action of the international organizations and the implementation guide, but it's not in any of the tools, hardly at all. So this is an area that I'm particularly interested in seeing improve, and I'm swimming in the world of One Health at the moment because of my work with the panel. But I mean, my efforts in the space are completely grounded in my work with EcoHealth before that.
Thanks so much, Dominique. Maybe Simon, if you could just say one thing very briefly, and then we're going to move on to the next activity.
Yeah, I think I would see it in a broader, in an even broader idea, because we tend to put things in boxes. So we say, oh, this is an ant, this is a vertebrate, this is a human, this is a man, this is a woman. And all those boxes are actually confusing us because we don't understand that we are nature. And I think, I mean, that's why I resonate with your EcoHealth background. I think really what this whole thing is about is to stop thinking in boxes. And no matter which box we start deconstructing, it's always progress.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think it's a question that a lot of us are grappling with in this space, and so I really appreciate the discussion. I wish we had more time for discussion, but of course we will continue these conversations in the future. The next thing that we're going to do is sort of working our way towards our small group sort of breakout sessions. And so Mark and I are going to demonstrate how to use Mental Modeler. And what I've done is I've sent everyone in the chat a link to a Google Doc, which has basically the instructions for the activity and also a scenario that you're going to use to construct your map. And so let me just start by sharing my screen and going to, let's see. So we've been sort of talking about fuzzy cognitive mapping, and a few of the presentations were sort of focused on that. But I just want to give a brief introduction of what the concept of the tool is. And so it's a form of concept mapping where you actually define the relationships between the components. And so there's basically 3 steps to that. First, you define the components of a system. Then you define whether they're direct or indirect relationships. And then you define the degree of influence that one component has on another. And so if you look at this diagram on the right side of the slide here, let's take C3, which is component 3. You'll see that there's a blue arrow going from C1 to C3, which means it's a direct relationship, as in when C1 increases, C3 also increases. And you also see that C2 has a red arrow to C3, which is an indirect relationship, as in when C2 increases, C3 decreases, and vice versa. And so rather than spend time with you looking at this diagram, what we're actually going to do is go into Mental Modeler and actually show you functionally how this works. And this is what you'll be doing in your small group. So you can actually just follow along, and hopefully we'll make it very simple. So let me just take one moment to share my screen here. And let's see. Yes, this one. So hopefully everyone can see that. The link to this should be in that Google Doc that you all have access to. So basically you're going to go here, you're going to go up to software and click on this link. And I didn't have to enter the password or username because I've obviously already been here. But sorry, let me go back there. But you will enter the username and password. And then Mark, can you help me out here and start listing off components? Mark, I think you're muted. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, I was speaking,
Okay.
but I was muted. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, if you can just list off some components for me.
Yeah, I will list 2 or 3 of them. The first one is sustainable canteen initiatives. Or let me see. Is it sustainable food initiatives in schools? Yeah, the second one is
Okay.
healthy soup snack program.
Okay.
And the other one is parents' concern about access to healthy food outside school, or parent food access concerns.
Okay.
And the other one is budgetary constraints, or families' budgetary constraints.
Great.
And then the other is lack of time for cooking.
Great. And then what would be like some of the outcomes, just so we can add? So I think it was obesity in children, am I correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's just say maybe one of our main outcomes is childhood obesity. So again, just in the interest of time, let me just start to show you how this works. So basically the question that I always ask myself when I'm doing this activity, if we're thinking about childhood obesity, and basically you click on this arrow and you're drawing an arrow from Healthy Soups program to childhood obesity. And so the idea here is, as you have more Healthy Soups programs, what happens to childhood obesity? So we can say in our mental model that we're going to have a decrease in childhood obesity. And what this number is here is the strength of that relationship. So for example, -1 would be the highest value, as in Healthy Soup programs have a really, really, really large impact or strength of association with childhood obesity. Whereas if maybe it just has a small, maybe not quite as strong relationship, you might see negative, let's just say -2. Now we have sustainable food initiatives. So again, we're going to draw our arrow. Now what happens if we have more of these? We're going to have decrease of that, but maybe the sustainable food initiative is a little more important than the Healthy Soups program. So now we see that we have -0.5, whereas here we had -0.2. So if we have lack of time for cooking, so if this increases, then we're going to see also an increase in childhood obesity. So now that's a positive relationship. As budgetary constraints increase, we're probably going to have an increase of lack of time for cooking. So we'll see that that's a direct relationship, and so on and so forth. Mark, do you want to add anything about this process? And then we can ask people if they have any questions.
Yeah, I think at this level it is, as you said, we just have 3 steps. The first one is to try from the scenario that you have, from the problem that you have, try to identify what are the different components of the system and tangible and intangible component of the system. And then secondly, what are the relationship between all these components? And then you look from that relationship, how do you value, how confident you are according to the effect that you see. Is it negative or positive, and how, and from the scale from 1 to -1, then try to find the value between. And yeah, I think that's the most important part. I don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, so if you look at the instructions for this activity, you'll see that after you create your map, so you'll create your map in this window, then you go to this preferred state and metrics window, and this is actually going to give you what's called centrality. So centrality is basically all those arrows going away from something, and then all the arrows going towards something, and the weights added up. And so this is something called degree centrality, which is just the sum. So you can see here that childhood obesity is our main outcome, has the highest centrality. And it's sort of interesting to examine how the centrality is different. Obviously, this is a very incomplete map, but you and your groups will have some more time to go into that. And then once you're sort of done looking at these measurements, we're looking at the scenario. So in that case, maybe you have an idea for an initiative. Say we want to increase the sustainable food initiatives. So let's say we increase this on our map. Now, of course, we have a very simple map, so we only see one change. But functionally, what this is doing is showing you what happens in all of the other components of your map if you increase, the value of one of the factors. It could be a factor that's already here, or if your group comes up with another initiative, you can add it to your map and then see what happens when you increase it. And the real power of this is you can see some unintended consequences. You can see feedback loops. It really allows you to examine what's happening, basically. So let me just stop there and see if there are any questions. And don't worry, we're going to be floating around these groups before we split up. But at this moment, is there anyone who needs further clarification? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So I think let me share this. Yeah, so these are basically the instructions. And so now what we're going to do is just split people into breakout rooms. And all these instructions are on that Google Doc. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen here. We're going to have about 40 minutes. And maybe Angel, I'll ask for your
Yeah,
ask for your
absolutely.
help here. I think probably 4 breakout rooms is appropriate.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
maybe just before that, to tell to our participant that we will again come back to the main room to discuss and conclude. So don't leave right now because we will still need you for the discussion and all other activities that we have at the end. So yeah, please don't drop out because we are almost to the nice part of the workshop.
Yeah, and then it looks like there was a question about centrality from Paul. So the idea with centrality is if you imagine all those arrows going towards and away from a concept, they each have a weight assigned to the arrows. And the degree centrality is just the sum of those weights. So it's the idea that you're seeing, how connected each component is, and then how large the sum is. As in, the higher the sum, the more important those connections are, and the more number of them. So I hope that helps. So yeah, let's do our breakout here. And I think, Angel, are you starting that process?
Yeah, people are jumping into the rooms now, so you should see an invite to go into your rooms. And all the co-hosts have not been assigned to one, but you should be able to jump freely into them.
Great.
Great, thank you, Angel. So it's 6:40 right now, so I say we give people, maybe till 7:20 or so, 7:15. And the other co-hosts, if you want to join the rooms and assist, that would be great.
I can broadcast how long everyone has, Evan. Were you saying like trying to work backwards here? Is it just over 30 minutes?
Yeah, let's start with 30 minutes and then check in and see how people are doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Sukuman, if you want to jump into different rooms, let's see, how about I can go into room 2 and see how they're doing, and then we can always come back and reconvene or talk on WhatsApp. So let me go check out room 2. That's fine. Why don't you
Okay,
start and then
great.
we'll just go from there. It's fine.
Okay, I can start. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. It'd be a perfect way to do it. Let me stop sharing mine. Oh,
Can you
see,
see
now
that?
that's great. That's great. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so sorry, I've closed the screen now. What was the first question that you wanted us to answer?
Yeah, so just thinking about like centrality, maybe drivers, receivers, kind of the dynamics of your map.
Sure. Yeah, so
Yeah,
our
so kind of
group, I
walk
mean,
us
we
through
were
that.
sort of, sorry. We were sort of
Go ahead, you're
focusing, I
good.
guess, more so on how to use Mental Modeler, and so we, could have probably spent a whole day fine tuning what different things we were going to connect to different stuff. But in the end, we just chose to sort of pick what we sort of saw as the low hanging fruit, the easiest things to connect to each other. And this was sort of what we ended up with here. So when you put it in here and order by the centrality, we ended up having childhood overweight obesity as the only real receiver and with the biggest centrality score. And then in terms of drivers, we've got, this is one that we added ourselves, parents' knowledge of healthy foods, food system sustainability, and the family budgetary concerns in order of centrality there. Then we've got some other ordinary things which I won't waste your time to go through. In terms of the scenario, we tried different things. Interestingly, we found, probably because we've only got quite a basic model here, like we haven't linked up as many things as you would do normally. We found a lot of the time when we just did one intervention, we weren't actually getting any impact in terms of our central outcome here, the childhood overweight obesity. So this one that I've got up on the screen here is what happened when we increased the availability of fresh local products at the same time as also increasing the parents' knowledge of healthy foods. And so when we improved both of those things, we found that parents' food access concerns decreased, childhood overweight obesity decreased a little, economic accessibility to healthy food increased, and the nutritional quality of the available food increased. And we were just sort of reflecting that often in real life, you do end up having interventions which target more than one area. So then, for example, if we got if we did only leaflets, let's say, and we didn't improve the availability, oh, sorry, I don't know if my computer will let me. Yeah, there you go. Then we end up losing some of our impacts over here in terms of budgetary constraints and food access concerns. So feel free, anyone else in my group, to jump in if there was something which I'm missing out. We actually just jumped straight into the exercise and didn't go through our different backgrounds. So yes, I can't really comment anymore on that.
Yeah, no problem. That was fantastic. Maybe you will have another group if a representative wants to share their screen and kind of take us through in a similar manner their map.
I guess we were group 2, so I can go, and similar to group 1, we didn't have a chance to do introductions. We just jumped right into it. But anybody from group 2 that wants to add anything, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but I'll just make note of a couple things that we kind of uncovered as we went. One of the first ones was that we decided, we noticed right away that childhood overweight and obesity was sort of the central outcome. So we put that kind of in the middle of the map, thinking that there'd be more arrows going to it. We also noticed a few of the items that we pulled from the Google Doc. We changed the wording a little bit. Like, for instance, I think it said lack of time for cooking. And when we tried to look at the relationship between lack of time for cooking and childhood overweight obesity, it was almost like lack of time was a double negative. So we found it simple simpler cognitively to just change it to time for cooking. And then we played around with the map just in terms of moving boxes to try to make it more clear and discuss, you know, about arrows crossing each other and tried to eliminate that. And then we did get into this, looking at the preferred state and metrics, and childhood overweight obesity was clearly the highest and the receiver, but we kind of knew that in the beginning. So we asked Mark about that, who was in our breakout room, and he commented, and maybe he can jump in and add anything to this, but we had questions to him about that, and he suggested that there's really two ways to use the map. One is to come in with an identified outcome and then map from there, or if you don't know what the outcome, you create your map and the outcome might emerge. So that was a kind of a key learning for me. And we didn't really get to the scenarios, we just started, so I don't really want to speak to that, but I'll open it up here to anybody else from the group that had any other comments.
I think maybe we agreed that to come up with the central tendency, it depends on the factors. Sometimes you can start with the conclusion, maybe knowing that the outcome is this. But sometimes if you're working with different people from different discipline, you can discuss and then come up with this central tendency, with the highest central tendency at the end of your research. So this tool, I think, seems to be nice. It's my first time to see this. So for the researchers, I think sometimes you start with your research without knowing what might be the contributors of maybe the outcome of your research. So as Stefan said, at the beginning, we thought maybe obesity can be central, but at the end, there are some other contributors which can also be contributing into the research. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Do we have another? I think that was two groups, so we have two more. Is there another group member here that can share their screen?
I can do that. Let me share it. Can you see it, I guess?
Yep. Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah. So we spent some more time on introduction on introduction rounds. So this is a bit how far we got with the modeling. So yeah, interestingly enough, we for some reason it just happened that we put the cases of childhood obesity at the bottom, and we did for a while first just put in the variables, and then we started creating some links. And it's true that we had a bit of a focus that went there. And then towards the end, as we were having discussions, we were trying to focus on the other variables and how we can also link variables in between, of course, and not just focusing on childhood obesity. It was also interesting to see a sort of feedback loop where we were seeing that, for example, if we have more free hot meals, then maybe there's a less lack of time here. We didn't crack that, but then maybe if there's course, more lack of time, it affects childhood obesity. And then we saw this feedback loop of maybe if there's more childhood obesity, then there's more supportive project partners, which increases the amount of free hot meals. And so it's a bit of a perverse loop where we would almost guess if maybe you would have more obesity, then there's more support. And then this could affect budgetary constraints, and there will be more money for other things. So anyways, this is a short version of some little feedback loop we looked at. And we played around with this a little bit, but we didn't have so much time. I don't know if anyone else from our group wants to add something to that.
I think your discussion about feedback loops is so important, and one of the really neat things about this exercise, which you guys found out, is that you can actually visualize those loops while you're making these and start to think about, yeah, how does So it was really neat that you did that in the short, obviously very short time that we had. Maybe someone from the last group can present briefly before we wrap up here and finish our session.
Should I
think
stop sharing?
maybe-
Sorry. Yeah. I just realized.
I think Margot had to leave, so I don't know if it may have been on her computer that group did their map. So we may be down a group, which is fine. So let me just go back to the presentation here. So Mark and I are just gonna sort of have a few words, maybe a couple takeaways that we hope kind of stick with you, and then we'll have just a couple minutes for your sort of reflections, and then we'll be done. So let me just start here. And this is actually going back to something in the gender session that we talked about. Moses especially was emphasizing transdisciplinarity. And so the thing that I want to emphasize here is that participatory fuzzy cognitive mapping, as in you're doing this with community members or in a workshop or whatever, is actually a transdisciplinary approach where you're combining this academic knowledge with conventional or local or indigenous knowledge. And you can actually integrate that information. So very briefly for my PhD, I actually aggregated multiple maps together into stakeholder maps. I aggregated all my maps into a final map. You can actually combine information in different maps mathematically by aggregating adjacency matrices, which I don't need to get into right now. Or you can aggregate your maps in a sort of larger group setting. So it's really interesting to bring together those different pieces of knowledge into the map. And so I just wanted to sort of, put this idea in your head that can really lead to synthesis and validation of various knowledge systems. Or if you want to get sort of more philosophical about it, we're combining epistemologies or ways of knowing. And of course, there's a million different applications to any kind of systems thinking approach. Obviously, this is just one tool and methodology out of many. But it's, action oriented, it enables timely interventions and informs decision making. And we really need these transdisciplinary tools to tackle the wicked problems that we're all facing at the human-animal environment interface. So I'll just stop there and let Mark sum up, and then we'll have some time for reflection.
Yeah, so as I think Simon and Nicholas said at the beginning, system thinking is part of a journey. So you start by clearly stating the goals and the problem that you want to solve or to understand clearly. And then you map out the system. And after mapping out the system, it helps you to see what are the drivers, what are the receivers, and what is the IS centrality and all these. And then you co-design scenarios or interventions with participants or communities and or all those stakeholders that are involved. And then you implement those and try to monitor and evaluate how these are responding to the goal that you had at the beginning. So it is a circle. So you can every time, because Simon stretched at the beginning that as problems that we are trying to solve are complex adaptive problems. So we also need to every time doing the same process, restarting the process to try to see if there are any changes in the system, and then improve our way of understanding the system. And so going through the same process almost regularly helps to keep a good understanding of the system. And also it helps to keep in mind that the systems change as well. So you need to have that in mind. So if the goal is not clear, even your system thinking session will be very difficult for people to really achieve something at the end, because you really need to be clear and specify your boundaries, your key points, and what you want really to get at the end. And that's really helps to get people to give their ideas on discussion during the group work. So system thinking needs at the end, once you do your mapping exercise, what you look at is what are the leverage points for action. And these leverage points can be, there is in Donilla Midwall's book on thinking in system, a lot of like almost 11 or 12 leverage point for action in a system that you can look at and see. So the idea is to see what are the leverage point for action in the system in which I'm working for the problem that I'm trying to solve, and then take action. So Nicholas said at the beginning that at the end, we need to show the impact. So we just don't focus on, yeah, the map looks beautiful. What we did is so nice, the connection, yeah, but what does that give to as an impact at the end? So we really need to see after the mapping exercise, what are the key strategies, what are the key actions, and how can we take action together to improve the system and solve the problem that we have in mind. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so as you have seen for this exercise that we have used, system thinking is, and especially physical-cognitive mapping that we have used, and system thinking more broadly, is very flexible. So you can use for diseases, for any other challenges, for any other problems. So you can really use it. It's flexible, and it can be applied to any field. That's why we have seen that it can be applied to gender studies, to diseases, to any other things. So secondly, while you work as a team to try to build your model, it also improves your way of working together, how you are collaborating with people from different sectors, different level of knowledge, or different knowledge systems to come together to a common understanding and a system map. So, and I think Ivan just said it, using this kind of methods, which also improves the inclusion of non-scientists and communities, which is very interesting in terms of transdisciplinarity. And when you map clearly your problem and you see how the system looks like, strategies that you are able to put in place can have high impact, and you can have sustainable interventions. This is different from a linear approach where you just solve the symptoms. Here, when you go deeper in your understanding of the problem, it also helps to have sustainable intervention with highest impact. So for conducting this kind of workshop, it is really not costful. I'm doing the same, and Ivan is also doing this kind of participatory mapping with communities. You really have a very limited budget for data collection, because the most important step that you have is having these stakeholders, communities, and key people that are addressing the problem that you want to understand in a room, and share with them the method that you want them to use and build the model. So the cost is relatively not that high compared to other methods of data collection. So that's why we are also happy, but it provides a lot of understanding compared to other methods that are used in research. So that's where, and something that is very interesting that I will finish with, and is that if we go to the slide, you will see we said it at the beginning. The best way of understanding system thinking is learning by doing. If you just focus on reading very theoretical books and attending very theoretical online courses without any practice, as we did, we just used a case study and you tried to map yourself and you saw how it is simple to do. So learning by doing is the best way to understand systems thinking, but also to understand the method that I used to map out the system. So that's it from my side. Ivan, you can then move forward, and yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. I think you really summarized well the session, and also the sort of journey of this is obviously just one small step into applying, and these tools and methods are really there for applying them. They're not there for thinking about them, or I mean, it's all fun. We like to think about complex things, but let's get out there and actually use these tools. So my sort of question for you, and we have a few minutes here, is just some reflections. So, you know, if anyone feels, if you want to talk more about the process, maybe making your map, or even can you envision using fuzzy cognitive mapping or another systems methodology in your own work? Maybe what barriers can you think of, and then what further resources or learning opportunities would be helpful to you? So I think I'll just leave the floor open, and hopefully someone will have some more reflection and questions. So I invite you to unmute and participate.
I've got a reflection if you want me to go.
Please.
I'm planning on using fuzzy cognitive mapping and sort of system dynamics modeling as part of my PhD. I'm just really early on, but I guess one of the challenges that I foresee is going to be, facilitating like the focus group discussions, which I plan to have producing these maps. I kind of can imagine that the first time you run it, there might be lots of questions and things which I might not be prepared for. And so I think maybe just doing a few practice rounds with colleagues and sort of learning those facilitation skills might be something that's helpful to do in advance.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
And this is an opportunity to connect as well, because we have also been going through the same, and we can always share what we have done and how we have learned through the process. And that can, if you think that can be helpful, yeah, please reach out. And even and myself and so many other people here, including our panelists, we can always try to help.
Yeah, I just had this conversation with Sirimon, and we were sort of laughing because the first time I did my focus group, I wrote everything in a notebook, like for the first 20 minutes, and then I like wrote the concepts on a flip chart after. And then the first time I did that, I wrote them on sticky notes, and then I stuck them on this flip chart. And then after like 2 focus groups, I was like, why am I not just writing the concepts directly on the flip chart while I'm doing the semi-structured questionnaire? And it was like such a duh moment, right? But I think you're exactly right that, every time you do this, you're going to get, better at it, and starts to make more sense. But we're certainly here as a resource, myself, Mark. I think, hopefully you can, I believe you're in NEO. If you're not, obviously you can sign up and email me or whatever, and we can always chat about it. So happy to be a resource. There's a lot of really, really great researchers and people who are great teachers here in this session as well.
Cool, thank you.
I have a question, Evan and Mark. I'm just it seems to me that the strength of using a tool like this would be directly related to the experts or the relevant knowledge holders that are in the room. And it reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if anybody's has used like the Delphi technique, which is all about collecting the experts and then doing rounds to come to consensus. And I don't know if you have any comments about that. And I'm just thinking about if I was to use it in my research, to what extent is it important to have the right people in the room?
Evan, do you want to go first?
No, you go ahead. I have some thoughts too. So you go first, and then I'll
Okay.
I'll add my
Yeah,
thoughts.
so that's one of the key points of using this kind of participatory methods. So when you are using a participatory method, the stakeholder selection is the first and very important part of all the process. If you have the wrong stakeholders in the room, you end up having a map that really don't capture anything that you want to understand out of the system. So that's why stakeholder analysis and engagement is the first and very important step, because its impact in really in all I think it's really 100% impact the final output that you get. So for that, let me give you an example. You are talking about diabetes, but participants who are in the room are like coming from climate change. So they will not have enough contribution to understand the disease that you are trying to map, right? So having the right stakeholders is very important because it has an impact on the system that you are trying to understand. Yeah, that's it. And it's almost the same with the Delphi method that you mentioned, which also rely on expert knowledge. But here the difference with opposite to the Delphi method is that here we don't rely on experts. Here we include even communities because they have knowledge that is important to understand the system that we are studying, right? And we don't just remain focused on expert talking in terms of researcher or people with highest publication in the field. But here we want communities as well, and all these people to also contribute with their knowledge. Yeah, so Ivan, you can then.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that last point was what I was gonna sort of expound on maybe, and to use an example from my own work, which I'm working in northern Turkana, and there's government and NGO officials who are quote unquote experts, but working with the community who often are illiterate and have not had a formal education. They know what type of plants their different livestock species want to graze on, and they know where those plants are at certain times of year. And if there's not rain in one area, they move to the area where there is rain. And I could go on and on and on. So I think the sort of construct of expert versus non-expert is not always relevant when you're thinking about the systems mapping, because it's sort of one type of knowledge versus another. And another really interesting thing, and I think this is especially true for program implementation, is again, in my own work, I sort of compared those different groups of stakeholders, their maps to each other. And so I sort of aggregated the community maps and looked at what their priorities were and their perceptions of the system. And then you can go back and say, ask questions like, does the government have the same priorities? Do they have the same perception? You actually see where that mismatch is, and that actually has a really important value for policymaking, right? Because if you want to treat disease A, and yet everyone in the community actually cares about disease B, that's a very simple example, but just to give an example, then you're not going to be an effective policymaker or decision maker. So actually looking at those differences and sort of contrasting them, I think is actually a really valuable aspect. So yeah, thank you for the question. That would sort of be my thought on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else have some feedback or questions, maybe thoughts about how you would use this in your own?
In the chat. I don't know. Let me try to see. Rebecca, can you? Yeah, I think there is a question from Rebecca asking what other software you particularly recommend for this kind of exercise. So I think in terms of systems mapping, there's a lot of software out there, and some are under license and others are open and free for use. So yeah, from my thinking, I don't have any like best software that I can suggest for now. So it depends on how I think the size of the system that you want to map, and then because at certain points, mental model can handle much more bigger system maps. So you need to move to something else and try to explore others. So there are so many tools, and so from my experience, I've used CMaps, but CMaps does not do simulations. You just do systems mapping and end up there, and then you can use you can then import it into R to run the simulations, which is free and open source as well. So secondly, you can also use the most commonly used in the business and corporate world is Vensim, which provide like a lot of options for systems mapping, system dynamic, and doing all this. So there are really a lot of software, and those are just the few that I can maybe mention here. There's, I think, I don't know, other participants as well. If you have Ivan and everyone, if there are anything else that you want to mention, please also.
Yeah, so I've used a few different ones. Maybe I'll just mention them briefly, and then Paul. But so I've used, I like to input my maps, like transcribe them into Mental Modeler like we use today, and then I usually export the adjacency matrices so I can use them in different settings. So I use our package called FCEM Mapper that can calculate some different variables and aggregate individual maps into sort of stakeholder or whatever maps. I've used Gephi for visualization. It's like a network visualization tool. I think it works well. I've also used something called CNET to do, what is it called? Like transitive closure on my maps, which again, these are all sort of technical things, but I think for me, what works the best is try to figure out what you're trying to do and then look at different options, whether it's aggregation, visualization. I don't think Mental Modeler has the best visualization. It's a little clunky, but it's really easy to use. So yeah, that would be my thoughts. And then Paul, did you had something too?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I think that I'm more used to using the CMaps, concept maps. And I was wondering if the strength of the concept maps, as you know, is because you have a verb between the sentences, which really clarifies the relationship you think there is between the elements, which involves knowledge, but also value judgments and so on. But the disadvantage is you have no way of quantifying that relationship, which is an advantage of the system that you presented to us. So I was wondering if using like both systems, perhaps a concept map before doing the fuzzy map, would that be a way to use the strength of the two methods?
Yeah, maybe Tiffany can speak to that, because I haven't done much. I know, Tiffany, maybe you've done some type of different sort of mapping activities.
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge whether we're talking about like, drivers or impacts, or even in this case, as you're mentioning, like the kind of what relays the concepts. And I think, Paul, in one of your questions that was addressed in the chat was about like what makes this fuzzy. And I think it's around a lot of the uncertainty that you're talking about, is like understanding that a system can take different states and is conditioned on different variables. Like if this changes, how will it change the rest? And so I think that's precisely, I think the uncertainty that you're highlighting is precisely the fuzzy nature of it. And then also the beauty of understanding those different contingencies.
If I may,
yeah,
there is also maybe a difference in the way we use the two modeling tools. CMap, taking advantage of what you are describing, so the fact that we are labeling each arrow with a verb that is telling precisely what the one is doing on the other, the one concept is doing on the other. It leads us to use as concepts like actors, resources, I would say concrete elements, while in this kind of modeling, we are using variables. And so we can maybe like combine both by making one that is like describing the interactions between the concrete objects and then translating it into interacting variables, which is a totally different representation of the same situation. But indeed, in system thinking, it's always useful to have different representations of the same reality. We need like a plurality of methodologies to give different perspectives on the same problem. So it's very, very useful, but we don't have always like a direct synergy or a direct idea of how the different perspectives are connecting into generating a solution or an idea. We are just trying to multiply the perspectives, and somehow and hopefully it will create some insights. That's maybe what I can propose as some thoughts.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And we're just out of time, so I just want to sort of flash these few things, and then maybe Angel can get our picture, those of us who have remained through the activities here. But first of all, just want to thank my other early career representatives and Mark for always being so supportive, helping plan this session. I mean, I honestly learned so much in the past few hours. I think we had really wonderful conversations, and I look forward to having more. So I would invite everyone to join NEO. So let me put the link in the chat. NEO is the network for EcoHealth and One Health. You know, there's the new textbook that just came out that maybe some people are familiar with. So here's the website. You can join now, become part of NEO, and we have sort of quarterly meetings where we get presentations on what different members are doing, and really have some great interactions like we did today. And then I just wanted to put on people's radar too, we're in the process of planning a special issue for advancing systems thinking and practice in One Health through CABI, where I'm an associate editor. So I'm really excited to be putting that together, and we'll see that. And then Mark and Simon are going to be teaching the Planetary Health and Action Systems Thinking course, which I will put the link in the chat again. But yeah, Angel, can we do the picture real quick?
Yeah, perfect. Do you want to stop sharing just so I can see everyone on one?
Yes, let me do that.
Cameras on. If you want to be part of the photo, there's no pressure.
Everyone's systems thinking on 3. You know.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll count down from 3 and then just hold it like an extra second because it takes a second. 3, 2, 1.
Seems there are other cameras that are not open, and we will miss them in our photo. Yeah, I think they're coming up. Yeah, just give them 1 minute, one second so that they all of them open. Yeah, nice. Thank you.
Okay, we'll do one more.
Oh, yeah, good to see
Okay, we're
you.
doing one more.
Okay,
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so
very
much,
much for
everyone. Thank you to
joining.
our panelists too, especially. Really appreciate your insights, and thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Nicolas,
you guys for organizing.
Tiffany, and all the team, Sukuman.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very useful.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Thank you very
hopefully
much.
you can